All
I
right.
will say before we start though, um, this show is about 60 minutes long, so we're already a third of the way through it. So I definitely want to let's make sure we have enough space for you to deliver this latest discovery.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure we have enough time so you can deliver the download about the
Yep.
Grand Dragons and all that stuff.
Remember, you can edit the sound to fast forward to the meat of the message.
We can do
All
that
right.
too, for sure, for sure.
Right. So uh, this is as much for you. Um, I mean, you could do two shows. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, maybe for sure.
Yeah. And I'm giving you background that's already in the Emergence Beyond 2012 video documentary that I published in 2010,
Okay, cool.
and it's in the I published what do you call it, a basic transcript of a book of the movie that includes all of the visuals in the order they appear in the movie. I published that in 2012, and that's called Emergence Beyond, and is the first book in that series, because the sequel to it is actually it's on my it's right here. Uh,
Nice.
the Natural History of Life and Death. What the fuck is really going on? Oh, excuse me. WTF is really going on here? Um, Everything you really need to know right now about the Earth's natural subtle energy field and how to work it. And then Apocalypse, Ancient Greek, a disclosure of hidden knowledge, a lifting of the veil, Revelation, Emergence Beyond, Book 2. So I love making long titles, apparently. So what I was saying before, I just want to finish this part. The Venus has an 8-year cycle. It has a 584 day cycle. So it makes a pentagram over 8 years. So it goes 584 days, 584 days, 584 days, 584 days, 584 days over 8 years.
Okay.
And so my theory is that the center pentagram of the second site I discovered it in Big Sur, in what's known as, I think it's called Pacific Valley, that whole plateau, just down the road from Jade Cove. And the center pentagram would be the 8-year cycle of Venus, and the outer pentagram would be the 60-year cycle of Jupiter and Saturn. And so what this says is that the people that built these sites were they knew some stuff. They knew more than the average American today about, the sun, the moon, the stars. And it was so important to them that essentially they established these celestial observatories and maintained a community to support the continued observation of these celestial observatories over generations.
Wow.
And it's connected to what we're going to discuss right here, because the download that I gave you in the woods there, that I felt I actually saw myself giving that download when I was in Big Sur for the solstice.
Wow. You said that.
I did. I spent about the better part of a week at this site in June, leading up to the solstice. I left on the solstice so that I could go measure the site in the node in Monterey, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So, 2 years after I discovered that pentagram site, I discovered a third site about a quarter mile away, and it also has certain alignments that are celestial in nature, and you may wonder why these observatories are there, but if you're there, it's pretty obvious why, because on the equinox.
What, real quick, can I ask you? You're calling them observatories. How is it an observatory? There, can you explain that?
Well, yeah, sure. The site at the top of the mountain gives you, if you're living down on the plain, if you're living down on that at sea level, you're right up against this coastal range. So there's no way that you're going to get a sighting of the eastern horizon unless you climb to the top of the mountain, which is where that observatory is. And in order to, okay, so when these folks, experience, remember, these are the survivors of a global catastrophe, right? A flood. And what's interesting to me is that when I finished the documentary in 2010 and published the book in 2012, as soon as I finished those projects, all this new information started to come. And there's actually scientific information that has come to light in the past 10 years that was, wasn't even conceived of when I did the first documentary. And that's why I ended up writing this sequel. So much information was coming that I just knew I had to write another book. And so one of the things that came to light is that's kind of settled science now, but was not even a thing, 12 years ago, when I published the documentary, is that there was a global catastrophe that happened between 11,600 years ago and 12,900 years ago. And this catastrophe, it looks like there is a comet that has a really funky name. I think it's a funny name because the name of the comet is named after the German astronomer that first calculated its orbit, right? And this brother's name is Anki. And if you know anything about, and I don't expect you to, but
That like inky? I know inky.
Yeah, it's not spelled the exact same way, but it's pronounced pretty much the same way. Inki is the Sumerian creator god, right? And also considered kind of the coyote of the Sumerian gods, the trickster god of the Sumerian pantheon. And but it's spelled Encke, and it arrived in the solar system 30,000 years ago. And when it got here, it was 50 miles wide. And it has an orbit that takes it between the orbit of Jupiter and Saturn at its furthest point, and then all the way into the orbit of Mercury. And it makes this orbit every 3.3 years, right? And the Earth crosses that orbit twice a year, and it is the Perseid meteor showers. oh, excuse me, the Torrid meteor showers. What am I saying? So it's, which we, right now, actually, right about now, June, July, is one end of it, and the other side is something like October, November. And apparently, according to science today, 12,900 years ago, it made a close pass to the Earth, and some of it is close enough that some of it broke off, and a couple of large pieces exploded in the upper atmosphere over the northern hemisphere, specifically over the what's known as the North American ice sheet and the Laurentide ice sheet. And when it did that, those ice sheets were pretty far along. They extended to southern Ohio. Chicago, New York, and Boston were under 2 miles of ice at the time. So it exploded in the upper atmosphere, went across Siberia, and eventually whatever was left landed in the Indian Ocean north of Madagascar and east of the mouth of the Tigris Euphrates. So it's a pretty safe bet that, you know, that was essentially the flood that everybody's talking about. But if you think about what happened, you're talking about a massive explosion over this ice sheet. Flash melted a good slice of the ice, and you have something that one moment it's an ice cube, and the next minute it's this huge body of water that has this momentum to move across, you know, the North America, and essentially carved it up on its way into the majority of it went into the Pacific Ocean, but there are some of it that went into the Atlantic. And you know, there's it's not just, you know, one group of people that figured this out. I mean, there's all this anecdotal evidence and scientific evidence from all around the world that pretty much nails the date on this. Okay, so these folks witnessed that. They came most likely from, at the time, ocean levels were 300 to 400 feet lower than they are right now. And all of Southeast Asia was one piece of land, all the way up to the 150-mile channel that runs between Bali and Lombok, and all of Australia and Papua New Guinea, and all of that was all one piece of land as well. And so these folks witnessed that. Those that remember to keep the top of their head open to the rest of the universe, went to the top of a mountain. They saw this whole thing happen. They saw the flood waters come and the flood waters recede, and then they, you know, followed their guidance to go across the world.
And these are that created those sites, you think, that you saw? Is there a connection there? Right.
Their descendants created these observatories. Right. Remember, they were charged with beginning these migrations around the Western Hemisphere. And basically, you know, to kind of speed things up here, their job, their focus, their mission was to reconnect humanity to the Earth grid in the Western Hemisphere. And the way that they did that was to go to all these subtle energy, Earth energy sites around the hemisphere and hold ceremony there. And in these migrations over generations, they did exactly that. They they lived there for a while. They established, they surveyed the area. They found out where the cool spots were, where the energy lines were, and they held ceremony there over generations, and then continued on their migrations. And I go more in depth into that in the documentary and all that kind of stuff. So I want to fast forward to what's happened over the past 12 years. So in 1999, on the autumnal equinox, I was on the top of Silbury Hill in southern England, which is a man-made cone with a flat top that's covered in sod. And apparently there are 2 chambers down inside of it they've discovered using LiDAR. And it's at the base of a hill that's higher than that. And that it overlooks an area where a lot of what do you call them, crop circles have been showing up over the past 30, 40 years. And so it's pouring buckets. I'm with these 2 women friends of mine, and we climb up one side of this mound. We get to the top, and there's this other brother coming up the other side, and he and I start this conversation like we had just finished a conversation, like, or that we're carrying on, continuing a conversation. His name happened to be Rory McQuestion, and he is a British trained, classically trained geologist. And in his youth, in his when he began his professional career as a geologist, he worked in a gold mine in southern Africa, underground, 1,000 feet, for 7 years. And while he was there, he learned how to dowse, and has been teaching people how to dowse ever since. And has been, because of the work that he did, primarily about 12 years ago. He and I have been working together ever since. And on our first project was this thing called Conscious Evolution Day, where we set up this global meditation that would happen at the solstices and equinoxes at sunset, and where people would focus on their own personal conscious evolution. And it, created a wave of those meditations going around the world on the equinoxes and solstices between 2008 and leading up to December 21st, 2012. So
same guy as Rory. This is the same person.
Excuse me?
He
Rory
goes,
Duff.
Yeah.
Rory McQuestion is his name. He goes by Rory Duff. I think it's because it's easier. It's a lot easier for people. Most people aren't going to remember McQuestion, but they definitely they definitely can remember Duff. It's Duff. So RoryDuff.com, and he has a thing on an Instagram account, The Geobiologist on Instagram, and his Instagram account is like a masterclass in subtle energy and earth energy lines.
Nice.
So he won awards from the British Dowsing Society for his work in 12 years ago. Between 2008 and 2010, he did. I recognize this is going long, and I think what you're probably going to end up doing is just editing it down.
Yeah.
However and I think it's important for me to just give you as much as I can, and you can cut and paste any way you want.
I'm aware we'll have to cut a lot out. But
okay. Yeah. Cool. All right. So he won awards for this survey that he did in between 2008 and 2010, where he measured on a daily and sometimes hourly basis the subtle energy lines in his vicinity in southern England, where there's a lot of them. And through that survey, he did that for a year and a half to almost 2 years. And through that, he did the first comprehensive survey of the subtle energy system in England, but also the subtle energy system of the planet, because he was able to establish that there are these certain key 4 main points in the calendar year when all the ley lines of the planet, no matter what frequency they usually vibrate at, they all coalesce at the same frequency. So the slower ones would slow. I mean, the slower ones would speed up, and the faster ones would slow down. The slower ones are the larger ones that have the longest wavelengths, and the faster ones are the ones that are generated by the Earth, and they're ubiquitous. They're friggin' everywhere. Like if you throw a stone, you're gonna essentially it would be hard for you not to hit one of those or encounter one of those. So he discovered that they for what we've come to call a harmony period at the solstice and equinoxes, that all of the ley lines would resonate at the same frequency, would vibrate at the same frequency, and then
could you give
they would stay together.
Can you hear me? Could you give a quick description of what ley lines are, just kind of quickly?
You bet. Getting there. It's a lot of information. I recognize. This is what 22 years or more of actually it's 30 some odd years of information. That we're trying to deliver in what, an hour.
Well,
and I the good thing is we have this technology where we can record, and people can play that stuff back and replay it so they understand, the salient points. So, subtle energy lines, ley lines, there's several different frequencies. I'm only going to be talking about in this thing about the ones that we've been working with. There are other people that study this stuff that have discovered other frequencies of subtle energy lines, and the 3 orders of lines that I'm going to be talking about have to do with what distinguishes them is their what generates them. Okay, so there's 3 main kinds: the ones that are generated by the Earth, the ones that are generated by the Sun, and the ones that are generated by the active galactic cores in our galactic neighborhood, of which there are 6 right now. But up until 2017, there were only 3 that were directly apparent on the planet. And the ones that are generated by the Earth are caused by the core of the Earth rotating against its outer core creates friction, right? And that friction, one of the byproducts of it is a low frequency sound wave that radiates to the surface. And we experience that being on the surface of the planet. We experience that as a line that's detectable by, I would guess there must be some scientific gadget that you could use that would detect that line. But the ancients used dowsing rods, and you can get so sensitive to the energy that you don't need rods. You just know. And everything that I'm telling you about this stuff is like we're rediscovering it. The ancients, this was common knowledge, and the reason we know that is because they built their villages and cities and houses in alignment with this energy.
Right.
And I've directly seen this when I went to I dowsed Chaco Canyon last Labor Day. What was that? 2021. And if you're unfamiliar, the Chaco Canyon runs northwest to southeast, and this solar energy line runs exactly through the canyon for miles, running, parallel or within it. And the oldest structures in the canyon, Pueblo Bonito, and the graveyard just outside of the Pueblo, are within the line. So whoever built it knew where they were putting it.
Right.
So the second order of lines are the solar lines, and the solar and galactic lines are essentially the same. They're caused by the same dynamic, and it goes like this. So the sun radiates cosmic energy, what we call cosmic radiation, which is a shorthand for all of the alpha waves, beta waves, gamma rays, X-rays, and that kind of thing. It's all called all together. Full spectrum of it is called cosmic radiation. And when those beams of cosmic radiation, which are hitting the Earth right now, hit the upper atmosphere, they create, they're converted to neutrinos, these subatomic particles that shoot down through the Earth and through everything. They're going through you and me right now, and everybody we know. And eventually they barely ever hit anything, because they're so small and so far apart, and everything on the quantum level is so far apart. But eventually, when they get down to the core of the Earth, they hit something, and enough of them hit something to create a low frequency sound wave that radiates to the surface and appears on the surface as a line. Up until 2017, the width of the Earth generated lines, low frequency sound waves, were between 1 pace to 5 paces wide. The solar lines were between 10 paces and 30 paces wide. And the third order of line is the Emperor Dragon lines, what we call the Emperor Dragon lines, which I believe is from the Chinese, or at least Asian Feng Shui tradition. And those lines were until 2017, they were 50 paces wide, and they're caused by the same thing: beams of cosmic radiation coming from the galactic center of these 6 galaxies in our galactic neighborhood. When they hit the upper atmosphere, the same thing happens. They create streams of neutrinos that go down through the Earth and eventually create low frequency sound waves at the core that radiate to the surface as these ley lines that were, up until 2017, were 50 paces wide. Okay, I know they were 50 paces wide because the first thing I ever dowsed with my copper angle irons that were a gift from my friend Nikki Stratton 5 years before. I'd never dowsed anything before, but in June of 2019, my friend Rory sent me an aerial, a Google Map photograph of this site in Big Sur that I was very familiar with. And it took me a couple of months to realize that he didn't know that in the foreground of that photograph was the archaeological site that I discovered in 1994.
Wow.
So he had marked up this photograph with a node that was a solar node, where 2 solar lines cross one another, and this new Emperor Dragon that came out of the ocean, at the Pacific Ocean at Jade Cove, went up the mountain and went right through this node, and then it continues across America to the Atlantic Ocean, just above the North Carolina Virginia border. And one of the things about these ley lines is, remember that they're sound structures created by low frequency sound waves, right?
Right.
So for some odd reason, they run in pairs. So if you discover one of them, it has a twin at some distance, depending what the source of it is, that runs parallel with it. And so the Emperor Dragon Lines, for the most part, as far as I can tell, they're usually between 50 and 70 miles apart, running parallel around the world, or at least they were. And then up until 2017, there were only 3 pairs of Emperor Dragon Lines on the planet. And they don't like to cross one another. They don't like, they'll run through solar nodes and earth energy nodes and crossings and everything. We call a node where any 2 ley lines cross, right? They'll go through those, but they avoid one another for the most part, generally. There were, up until 2017, there were only 6 places on the planet where Emperor Dragons crossed one another and made a node. And only 4 of those places were on land. And to give you an idea of the power that people recognize that these nodal points have, one of those places is this place called Mount Kailash. It's the most sacred mountain in the Himalayas, and is sacred, and over the centuries has been sacred to 6 different religions. And at this very moment, and at every moment in your lifetime, there are people that make pilgrimages to this mountain, and they prostrate themselves, meaning that they lay down, face down, arms and legs and fingers spread. They'll stand up, take a step, and do the whole thing all over again. And they do that all the way around this mountain.
These are Buddhists or a certain tradition?
There's Buddhist, Bon, the indigenous religion of the region. Just everybody. Wow. Doesn't matter what their religion is or if they have any religion. This is what people do there. Okay. Right? You can go there right now and you'll be well accepted. Whether you're an atheist or a scientist or a botanist or whatever ist you feel like is your istisness, you're gonna feel this energy,
right?
And you will be humbled. So I say that just to give you an idea of over the centuries and millennia, people have been recognizing the sanctity of this energy, the beneficial nature of this energy, and the character of this energy. And like I said, it wasn't until 12 years ago when Rory did that 1.5 year long measuring of the ley lines in his vicinity that we had any knowledge of the basic character of how the subtle energy system of the planet in this band of frequencies, what its character was, how it reacted, responded, what it did, and what it didn't do, and what the significant dates were that were affected by it. And we're still figuring this out as we speak. So I'm gonna give me a second. I need to roll up the windows because we're in a torrential downpour. Come on.
Well, you're listening to 91.9 WDRT Radio Free Space for Bro Show. I'm talking to David Alexander English, and he's given us the lowdown on and ley lines, and these Emperor Dragon Lines specifically.
Because there we go. Whenever I turn this on, it goes to the car and back. Forgot about that. So, 2017, a 4th pair of Emperor Dragon Lines show up on the planet. And these are what we've, just for lack of a better term, we've called it the twins. And it's a pair of lines that goes pole to pole, goes from the North Pole to the South Pole and back, and splits the pole. It doesn't go through the pole, it splits it. So if it's 50 miles wide between them, they're, there's one, if you're standing at the pole, one is 25 miles that way and one is 25 miles that way. And as it happens, it actually goes through the Western Hemisphere and crosses down through Quebec and down through, I think, Pennsylvania and Virginia and a little bit into North Carolina, and then goes into the Atlantic Ocean and goes down to South America and passes through Peru. And when it's in Peru, and then it goes into the ocean again, and goes around the world and comes up that way. When it goes through Peru, it forms, it kind of brackets an Emperor Dragon node where two Emperor Dragon lines cross in Peru, and it does the same thing that it does at the poles. 25 miles this way, 25 miles that way. It kind of sandwiches that node. So it's the only place on the planet that I know of where there are 6 Emperor Dragons in the same vicinity.
Wow.
Yeah, but for us in America, there's something really cool that's happening right now. So between 2017 and 2019, 2 more Emperor Dragons showed up on the planet. And the third one, the one that showed up in 2019, is the one that we're really interested in, because that's the one that comes up out of Jade Cove and Sunset Point on the Monterey Peninsula, and goes across the country east and west and goes into the Atlantic Ocean, or comes out of the Atlantic Ocean, however you look at it. The northern one, the one that goes from Monterey, goes through this place called Buckrow Beach in Newport News, Virginia. And the southern one, the one that comes out of Jade Cove, goes into the Atlantic at this a nature preserve. I think it's called Plum Island, or I think it's Plum Island Nature Preserve, just above the North Carolina Virginia border. And I know this because I dowsed those 2 points last Labor Day, last September. And what's important for us to, now we're getting down to the meat here. When I the first time I ever dowsed anything was the solstice of 2019. I dowsed the node on top of on the mountain above Jade Cove, within sight of the archaeological site I discovered about 100 yards away in 1994. That was the first thing I dowsed. And I went up there and I spent 5 days there basically sitting in that node. And at that time, all the Emperor Dragons on the planet were 50 paces wide. I dowsed the node and it was 50 paces wide because the Emperor Dragon was there. A node can only be as big as the lines that make it, that make it. And I was, I dowsed the Emperor Dragon and it was 50 paces wide. The node was 50 paces wide. I was wowed. I was amazed. I basically sat in the node for 5 days. And I wanted to see, I had been trying to do astral projection since 2014, and I wanted to see if I could do it in the node. I have yet to be able to do astral projection with full lucidity and control. I can do it, I definitely have control of my dreams when I want to, but no joy on the lucidity and no joy on the astral projection while I was in the node. But it was an amazing experience to sit in that node for that long. Ever since then, what Rory discovered in his survey 12 years ago was that when we first started studying this stuff, it was the harmony period was only between 10 and 16 hours on the equinox or solstice. And then that harmony period started to expand.
And that you're saying the harmony periods when all the lines are resonating together?
Exactly, resonating at the same frequency. And when I say resonating, what I mean is just like a serpent moves sine, cosine, side to side like this, the lines do the same thing, because once again, they're sound structures, right? They're vibrations, so they undulate, right? And that undulation is measurable. The earth energy lines, the earth generated lines, have an undulation between 10 and 16 hours. The solar lines back then, you know, when I started measuring in 2019, they were, I think, between 24 and 36 hours, and the Emperor Dragons were 48 hours, right?
I guess
then
you kind of lost me on that one. You're saying that's how long the harmony period is, 24 or what does that mean?
No. That's how long. That's what their vibratory frequency is, right? So they move side to side. You know, they'll move. If it's 48 hours, they'll move. If it's an Emperor Dragon and it's got a period of 48 hours, right? It moves to the right 24 hours, and then it moves to the left 24 hours, right? Making it a full undulation over 48 hours, right? If it's an Earth generated line, it has a period of, like, let's say it's 16 hours. It moves 8 hours to the left and then back 8 hours to the right, right? Making up a whole period of 16 hours, right? The solar lines, if they're, let's say they're 24 hours or 36 hours, 24 hours, they move 12 hours to the left, 12 hours to the right, right? But during the harmony period, the earth energy lines would slow down to match the 24-hour period, and the Emperor Dragons would speed up until 2017. Once these three new pairs of Emperor Dragons showed up between 2017 and 2019.
Wow.
Right.
That's cool.
And so what this says to me, I mean, the cause of that, I would say, is that the solar system has been moving above the plane of the, beyond the plane of the central plane of the galaxy, right? And the closer it is to the center line of the central plane of the galaxy, the more debris there is between the center of the galaxy and where we are. So that right now you can't see the center of the Milky Way galaxy directly, because there's so much dust in the way, you know, visually. If you, in the night sky right now, if you go outside and you look up, you can't see the.
They say it's a supermassive black hole too, don't they?
Right. But when did they discover that?
I don't know.
Sometime within the past 5 years.
Okay, gotcha.
Right. And the reason they were able to do that is because there's not as much dust between us and there anymore, and our equipment has gotten better to see through all that dust, right? But we still have no visual, direct visual, eyeball of the center of the Milky Way galaxy. We can see the center of other galaxies because we're not right on the plane, right? So we're just above, we're just passing up above the or below, depending what your perspective is. And the Earth, the solar system, takes approximately 250 million years to go make one orbit around the center of the Milky Way galaxy. And it has made, in its 5 billion year history, it's made about 17 orbits. We're on the 17th, I think, right now. And each time it goes around, it spends time going above, and then below, and then above, and it makes like three of those in every orbit.
I saw the science recently showing that during the orbit it goes above and below. I've seen there's science that showing that.
Right. Hold on a sec.
Okay.
Yeah, gotta do a little rain protection. Our shit's getting wet. All right, here we go. Let me close this. Yeah.
So
Boom.
they're going around the galaxy, but they're going above the plate, and below the plate, and above the plate while they're going around. Is what you're saying?
Yeah, they are we.
We,
They are we.
all
This
of
is the
us,
solar
every
system we're talking about.
sun.
All the planets together, going around the sun, going
Yeah.
up and down as we go around. Now, when we do that, at various times, there's more dust between us and the center of the Milky Way galaxy, and apparently, we're just coming out of um, a giant dust cloud, and that's why these three new emperor dragons have shown up. Three new emperor dragon pairs within such a short amount of time, within 3 years.
Is it because
And
of the dust, or is it because there's less dust?
it's because of less dust that
Okay.
we're able to see this stuff, right?
Okay.
Or be that these things have been able to show up.
Okay.
And they're becoming more intense. It turns out that all the emperor dragons, except one, has a period of 48 hours. The one has a period of 72 hours. And guess which one that is?
Coming through the states.
Exactly. Remember that before 2017, there were no emperor dragons in North America.
Uh-huh.
And now there are two pair. And they cross one another in Virginia. And they make a hashtag, a giant 50-mile square hashtag in the state of Virginia, in the middle of the state of Virginia.
Wow.
And I know this because I dowsed all 4 points last September.
Can you say where? Is there a town by there or what?
Oh, there's several towns. Because it's 50
Marker?
miles square, man.
Is there any
You know?
marker? Just the middle of
Yeah,
Virginia?
yeah.
Okay. Just want
Yeah.
to tell people where to go to get like lit up.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. Let's continue with this conversation because now we're getting to the actual interesting point. The reason why we started this whole noise, right?
Right.
So I have been measuring these the two nodes, the main two nodes on the west coast that the emperor dragons make with these solar lines. The one that's above Jade Cove in Big Sur, and there's another one on the Monterey line, 7 miles from Sunset Point, right across the street from just south of the Monterey Airport. There's this big meadow they graze cattle in, and there's only one tree, and it's about 50 yards from that one tree in the middle of this meadow. And there's two solar lines and an emperor dragon that run, and the emperor dragon runs through it. And I've been measuring these two places, and where they come out of the ocean at the solstices and equinoxes over the past 3 years. And as I said, when I first measured them in December of 2019, the nodes were 50 paces wide, and the emperor dragons were 50 paces wide. Then they were about 80 paces wide, then 120 paces wide, and then 200 paces wide. And as of last September, they were 600 paces wide, measured both on the East Coast and West Coast. And then make a longer story shorter, when I measured them in March at the equinox, March of 2022, they were 4 miles wide.
Wow. That's quite
and then yeah, it's a wow moment, but it gets more interesting. So I measured them the equinox, and by that point, by the equinox, the harmony period had been extending. First, it was, that they were it all happened all in one day back in 2010, 2008, right? It would happen all in one day. Then they expanded 3 days, the harmony period, then 6 days. The last in March, they were 15 days, the harmony period. And it only takes about 20 minutes for them to break apart, which is really kind of interesting to me for some reason. And then I measured them in twice in May, this past May. And they were in the exact same places that they'd been at the end of the harmony period, 4 miles apart, approximately 4 miles apart, 4 miles wide, excuse me. Because they're 54 miles apart. And then I went up to Big Sur, arrived on June 15th, and I did my measurements of the edges of the Jade Cove line and found they were still in the exact same place. The next day I measured them again, it must have been about 10:30. And I could tell that they had already started moving around 10 o'clock. And I could tell that at the rate that they were moving, it was 4 miles. They were moving at a rate of 4 miles a day.
Wow.
And the next day I measured it, and sure enough, they were 4 miles further, wider. And then the next day I measured every day, and every day they were 4 miles wider. I went up on the solstice, I measured them again. They were still growing 4 miles a day. And I went up to Monterey line, and sure enough, they had covered the same distance. And, I think by the solstice, they were like 24 miles wide.
Shit.
Yeah. And
you're doing these with your copper dowsing rods.
Right. Exactly. On the ground. And I would douse, find the edge, and then I would back out of the field, step back in the direction they'd been expanding, and within a few moments it would pass over me, and then I would step back some more, and I would, I did that several times to make sure that what I was observing was what I was observing. It's pretty friggin' amazing. According to when I got to the gathering, actually, I calculated what the expansion rate would be, how wide they would be if they continued. And I calculated that by the 28th of June, the southern edge of the Monterey line and the northern edge of the Big Sur line, that they would overlap one another. And apparently that's what happened. I haven't been able to do a direct observation. I'm about to in a couple of days, which is what I'll get to in a minute. But I also calculated that because these two lines on the West Coast are 54 miles apart, I calculated that if they continued to that rate of expansion of 4 miles a day, the center line of both lines would overlap one another on July 11th. But that said, as soon as I got out of the gathering, I called, I texted Rory to kind of update him. I sent him my calculations of the expansion rate of the subtle energy field of the planet. And I asked him what his observations were with regards to the harmony period. And he said that he measured it, and 3 other people did too, that the expansion, that the that the harmony period ended on the 8th of July, which happened to be the day that I came out of the gathering. And if it's true that the Emperor Dragon stopped moving, stopped expanding when the harmony period ended, that means that they are now 92 miles wide.
So they only expand during the harmony period? Is that what I'm hearing?
Apparently. I will find out when I go. So he also sent me, because I'd asked, knowing that I'm on this journey, I'm going to go to the East Coast right now. Excuse me. I asked for the coordinates of, excuse me, of where the Emperor Dragon crosses the Mississippi, because my intuition was telling me that the ancestors of the Hopi, the people that did these migrations, would have known where that place is, and they would have had some sort of marker there or something, right? Because these folks weren't just astronomers; they also knew about this Earth energy, and it was all one thing to them, And I'm not sure what you know about the Mississippian culture that predates, it's a pre-Columbian North American culture. They're all up and down all the waterways that run through North America are what were known as various cultures. They're called, but they're all the Mississippian culture, and they're all ancestors of the ancestors of the Hopi, and the descendants of the survivors of the last world purification by flood. And they all knew this stuff. They all knew the the celestial as well as the terrestrial and telluric energy. And it turns out he sends me these maps, which is how we work. I'll say, like last fall, I said, I'm going to Chaco Canyon. What's around there? And he sent me the line, his map, because he's an expert in distance dowsing. And I'm able to corroborate that on the ground, narrow it down. And he's pretty friggin' accurate within, like the Big Sur thing. He was off by maybe 20 yards. You know what I mean? It's just crazy stuff. Where the node was, he was off 20 yards. Wow. Crazy. So I corroborated that, and I confirmed everything that all the distance dowsing that he's done of this network of subtle energy lines in North America so far. And he sends me these maps, and it turns out, I'm not sure if you've ever heard of this place, but it's called Cahokia.
Yeah, I've been there. I used to live in St. Louis. That's right. I was actually going to guess that that was the place that it was going to be.
Right. Well, check this shit out. Pardon me. Check this out, brother. It turns out that there's a solar node at Cahokia.
Yeah, they're huge.
Now, here's the thing, bro. Solar nodes and solar lines, they never go anywhere. But they're expanding. Since these 3 new Emperor Dragon lines have shown up since 2017 and between 2017 and 2019. Remember, they were just between 10 paces and 30 paces wide.
Yeah.
They're now between 90 and 120 paces wide.
The solar nodes.
The solar lines themselves, and thus the solar nodes themselves.
So when the solar lines are expanding and these Emperor Dragons are expanding, are they expanding in both directions? Like, do you understand what I'm saying? Is the line like going north and south at the same time?
Well, they're not all running north and south. They run in all different directions.
Well, as it expanding in all the directions, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. It's no orientation to the 4 directions. No orientation. Because big. They run in all different directions.
Like a circle, basically getting bigger and bigger on all sides, like that.
Yeah, the nodes are getting bigger and bigger in all sides, right?
Okay,
Where they
cool.
cross one another. And the solar lines don't go anywhere,
Mhm.
like they don't get obscured. There's nothing obscuring the radiation coming from the sun. So they're perennial. They're always there. But they're being affected by the presence of these three new Emperor Dragon lines pairs around the world. And so
I'm actually,
the whole subtle energy system is being affected. And what I said to you before, I think is really important. That 5 of the Emperor Dragon pairs have the same period of 48 hours, but the sixth one, the last one to show up, Rory thinks that this one is the one that's coming from our galactic center. The one that goes across America, coast to coast, is 72 hours.
and that's from our, and the other ones are from other galaxies.
Yes, in our galactic neighborhood, right?
And were you saying that then, just to be clear, in the Kokia Mountains is where the Emperor Dragon is crossing the Mississippi? Is that what you're saying?
In the vicinity.
In the vicinity.
It
Okay.
doesn't go through the node from what I've seen with his distance dowsing. That's one of the things I'm when I leave here. I'm in Boulder, by the way.
Okay.
Um, I'm going to be going to St. Louis to corroborate, and to it'll be my first measurement of the Emperor Dragon since the solstice, and I'll be able to tell. They should be 46 miles north of the center line of the Emperor Dragon now, and I'll be able to find out if that's really what's happening. If it isn't 46 miles, if it isn't 92 miles wide, what is it?
Mhm.
And why is it showing that on the West Coast? So that's kind of what, this is, we can conjecture, but, we can make conjectures, but there's nothing like, getting out there with the old angle irons and, seeing where the energy is on the ground, or through the ground, so to speak. If it's stopped at the end of the harmony period, and they're 92 miles wide, that means they were 3 days short of overlapping completely, right? That means that, given the pattern that I observed at the last solstice, that they started expanding 5 days before the solstice itself, then within 3 days, if they expand at the same rate of 4 miles a day, within 3 days before the equinox in September, they will have overlapped one another. And at that point, you're looking at a subtle energy line, a sound structure that will be a swath 150 miles wide across America.
So now, and this isn't just the American line. You said it's the Sun lines and it's the other Emperor
Well,
Dragon.
it's affecting these expansions are affecting the whole system,
Mm-hmm.
right? All of the lines are expanding, one way or another. They're not expanding at the same rate, of course. The solar lines aren't miles wide, but they are, 3 or 4 times the size of what they were 4 years ago. And when you think about geological time, right? Like, rock over time has a consistency of toothpaste, I was told when I was in college by a good friend of mine, an engineer. But then I thought about it as like, over time, rock has a consistency of air, You know what I mean? But it takes a whole lot of time for
Yeah.
that to happen. But we're talking about 3 years,
Yeah.
and this expansion is happening, and you and I are two of a handful of people that have a friggin' clue about this even happening at all. What's interesting to me gets down to what's the effect on
Right.
populations,
What does it
right?
mean? What does all this mean?
What does it mean, right? And I can tell you from my observation that, the Monterey Peninsula has 3 towns on it: Monterey, Pacific Grove, and Carmel by the Sea, right? What most people call it Carmel. Right now, as of since September, the expansion has slowly consumed the whole peninsula, so that right now the whole peninsula, and even the towns that aren't on the peninsula, like Seaside and so forth, are within the Emperor, are not only within the Emperor Dragon line itself, but you know what I mean?
I like that.
Cosmic timing, baby. Yep. But also within the node, because the node is 7 miles from the coast, and the town is, if that, even if it's stopped on the solstice, 24 miles, you got a 24-mile radius around that node. The whole population of Monterey is within the node. And so they're the guinea pigs. There's other places in the country where the line goes through it, but Monterey is the only place that I know of, major population center, that has the whole population be exposed to a node.
Wow.
Right. So what I've observed is that, because it's not just since September, and it isn't just the past 12 years that this has been going on. I mean, we're talking like decades of subtly building up to what's happening right now. And the effect that I've observed is an energetic intensity and people's reactions to that. And one of the things that I keep track of is population, the population numbers, the number of incarnate souls on the planet right now. I've been monitoring that since there were 5 billion people on the planet in the early 90s, because I was somehow really curious about what would happen when the number of incarnate souls matched the base frequency of the Earth at 7.83 hertz, or 7.83 vibrations per second, right? And that vibrations per second, that what's known as a Schumann resonance, is caused by the 3,000 to 4,000 lightning strikes that happen on the Earth every day, right? Wow. It rings the bell of the planet. And the aggregate is this vibratory frequency of 7.83 vibrations per second. And by weird coincidence, our optimum meditative state is when our dominant brainwave pattern is between 6 and 8 vibrations per second. So that when our brainwave pattern is in a harmonic with the base frequency of the Earth, we are in the optimum meditative state. And the best use, like in answering what is the best use of this information, right? When we are daydreaming, what we call daydreaming, I consider daydreaming a spiritual practice, right? And what makes it a spiritual practice is when you begin, you recognize that you're daydreaming, and you continue to daydream consciously, right? You stay in that same vibe consciously. The best use of this information is more daydreaming, more self-induced trance state. The best thing about daydreaming is if you have trouble going to sleep, what you can do, because your breath rate regulates your brainwave pattern, if you breathe 7 breaths per minute, your brainwave pattern, your dominant brainwave pattern will be 7 cycles per second, right? 7 vibrations per second. If you breathe 5 breaths per minute, you'll go into what's called the delta state, unconscious. You'll go unconscious. So if you have trouble going to sleep, all you have to do is bring your breath rate down below 6 breaths per minute, and you'll go unconscious. But if you want to make the best use of this information, you want to be, practice breathing 7 breaths per minute. But you don't have to count. You just drop in the daydreaming with your eyes open. You're not going to go unconscious. You're going to, go into this state where everybody knows it. Everybody does it all day long, right? Whether you're reading a book or watching television or whatever, you're or what we call spacing out or spacing in, you're in that optimum meditative state. And when you're in that optimum meditative state, you have direct access to what's known as the Akashic record, the entire history, herstory, our history of the universe, past, present, and future. Right?
Like that.
Excuse me? Yeah, our best ideas come to us when we're in that state, unfiltered from our our higher self or our unconscious self or whatever, or super conscious self, whatever you want to call it, however we want to cut the pie, so what I found I've come to realize that I'm probably the most exposed person in the Western Hemisphere to this energy because of these studies that I've been doing at the solstices and equinoxes and all these nodes and within the lines and so forth. And I found that when I go to just to the line, just to the Emperor Dragon, I don't have to go to the node. Within 15 minutes or so, I'm in a creative trance state. All right, I'm composing, I'm writing, I'm painting, I'm drawing. You know what I mean? And it's really easy to get into that place. Another best use of this information is music. Preferably with your own body, toning, oming, singing, and while you're singing, you're going into a trance state, and whatever comes to you is you talking to you. And so Rory has been organizing these gatherings at nodal points in southern England at the solstices and equinoxes. And that's one of the things that they do is they get doing chanting or musicians playing or whatever. And they found that, and they've measured this with scientific instruments and stuff, the clarity of the music that is made with musical instruments is sharper in these subtle energy lines than outside of them.
Wow.
Yeah. So he's got a friend who's a really, borders musician, scientist type. And he brought the instruments and he did the scientific instruments and everything, and discovered just the purity of the sound that they were making, and not to mention